Joe Balyeat out of Bozeman. He joins us here live on Montana Talks. Joe, thanks so much for taking some time out to chat with us this morning.
It's good to be with you, Aaron.
It is.
Although I admit that I'm not with you physically in studio, and you're probably happy about that, given that I am COVID-19 positive.
Well, that's right. Well, yeah, luckily we've had a bunch of folks calling in and said us dropping in here for a while now. Well, first off, I know that you've seen a remarkable turnaround. I know you mentioned in your piece that you weren't doing too good early on as you struggled with the coronavirus, but then you saw a reversal in your downward spiral. I know you're not out of the woods yet, but you're feeling a lot better, and so we're thankful for that good news here for sure.
Yes, well, Aaron, my case is a little bit unique. I'm in that 2% that this thing is incredibly scary for. I have atrial fibrillation. I have an enlarged heart that I've had for 8 years that I also got from a virus. I have a history of blood clots in both lungs, and so for me, I'm right in the coronavirus crosshairs, as this thing can be deadly to me. But if you want a little bit of history of what happened in my case and my family's case, I'd be happy to give you that.
Yeah, because you started basically sheltering and isolating, almost self-quarantining weeks ago. I mean, you weren't waiting for some government order to tell you, because you knew that you were vulnerable medically, and so you started sheltering in place already, and yet still contracted the coronavirus.
That's absolutely correct. In early March, I called all my tax clients. I said, I'm canceling all appointments. I'm going to do everything by email. I'm right in the coronavirus crosshairs, and I'm going to just, my family, 5 of us, live way out in the country, and we isolated in early March, and I'm talking like after the first Sunday in March. And despite that, we started getting symptoms. Some of my family members had returned from a trip, flew back on March 3rd, and we suspected they got sick prior to even coming back to Montana. And then they started to get better, but then they got sick again, and I started getting sick as well. I had 10 days worth of symptoms, and then two weeks ago tomorrow, on Tuesday, a couple of us went into the hospitals. First time I had left my house in more than a month. We went into the hospital, and we were both tested and confirmed COVID positive. The county health department advised us to go back home and isolate again, and they determined that based on all the symptoms that all of us had, that all 5 of us had indeed contacted COVID-19.
For you, how bad did the coronavirus actually get and feel? It was significant, but it wasn't as bad as other times when I've been very sick with pneumonia and stuff. Of course, I never got to the pneumonia stage with COVID. It started out with headaches, fever, chills, went on to pretty intense stomach pain that lasted like all night long, that type of thing. Body aches, you feel like you've been run over by a truck. Again, the fever, in and out of fever, was just slight fever. Cough developed, a slight sore throat. For some of my other family members, they experienced some of the more exotic symptoms, loss of taste and smell. And in one of my family members' case, even though they're largely recovered from everything else with the virus, they still have no sense of taste or smell. Oh, really?
This is a serious illness. I want to distinguish between, I believe they're exaggerating the crisis, but I do not believe that they're exaggerating the disease. It is significant and scary.
Yeah. It's interesting how we can all fit into all 3 of those bubbles. We can be concerned about the coronavirus, take it seriously. We can also be concerned about the destruction of our economy and take that concern seriously. So,
I think folks can say, hey, let's treat this seriously, but let's also not destroy our economy. I know that's something you want to weigh in on as well. But we've got 1 minute before we take our next quick break, and then we'll have more time to chat with Joe Balyeat after this. But after they say, yes, you have the coronavirus, and you're in Gallatin County, which has had the highest number of positive cases, what do they do for you? What do you do differently? I mean, is it just kind of go home and stand by?
Okay. Well, we were tested at the hospital itself, but even after it was confirmed we were positive, they told us our best option was to self-isolate. I had been concerned about the situation, so I had already contacted one of my clients, who's a very innovative young doctor, and had in consultation with him, he said, Joe, after just reviewing everything, your history and everything else, if you are COVID positive, I have no problem prescribing to you hydroxychloroquine in combination with what is recommended.
Well, this morning we've got a great guest on the show with us, Joe Balyeat, a longtime Montana lawmaker from the Bozeman area. He wrote a guest opinion column. I'm Joe Balyeat, and I have COVID-19. We've been talking with him, for those of you just joining us, about how he already went into isolation prior to contracting the coronavirus, and then we talked about just what it felt like with the coronavirus, what it actually feels like. Because for many of us, maybe we haven't had the opportunity to actually talk with a coronavirus patient, especially somebody that we know. So for a lot of us, this is our kind of first chance to hear from somebody, especially somebody well known like former state senator Joe Balyeat. Joe, thanks again for joining us and sharing your personal story here. So you were talking about your prior health conditions and the symptoms that you had from the coronavirus, the pain, everything. And I know based on reading your column here that you were very concerned. So you end up working with your doctor. You end up getting a treatment, a combination of treatments, including hydroxychloroquine, which is something President Trump mentioned early on as something that was seeing some positive effects in some coronavirus patients out there. Talk about how you got hydroxychloroquine and how you say it worked for you.
Sure. Well, of course, being in isolation is pretty easy. I read hundreds of articles on the subject as I saw my symptoms developing. Of course, CNN daily broadcasting their anti-Trumpian warnings that hydroxychloroquine is unsafe and not as safe as dying. Despite all that, the articles I read, many doctors say, hey, this is working. A combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and zinc. Zinc I found is very important in the whole treatment. I could not take azithromycin because of my heart problems. The combination of hydroxy and zith would have been pretty dangerous for me. So instead, my doctor substituted another recommended combination of hydroxychloroquine and zinc and doxycycline. My other family members are receiving the recommended combo of hydroxy and azithromycin, and they seem to be recovered much quicker after taking that than me. It's gone a little slower with me, but I understand that. And at this point, the only symptom I've had for the last week almost has just been a pesky cough, and I'll get back to that because there's reasons for that in my own history that may pose danger in the future. But just a pesky cough, don't even have a sore throat anymore. In my opinion, the press has been just feeding these fires of fear about hydroxychloroquine. At the same time, the press, especially CNN, was just pushing respirators like crazy, that we got to have more respirators. And of course it was because Trump didn't provide enough respirators ahead of time. And so in my opinion, there's a political bias and slant to their reporting on this thing that has caused them on the one hand to push respirators, and on the other hand claim that hydroxychloroquine isn't as safe as dying, which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting. New York State went from begging for respirators to now saying, "Hey, we got respirators. Who needs respirators? We're giving them out."
Yeah.
And yeah, that's an interesting point you make, because I remember when President Trump first mentioned hydroxychloroquine as a possible treatment here, and boy, the CNN, or CNN as some refer to it, Xi Jinping, CNN. It's like if Trump says it, they have to attack it. They have to criticize it. And meanwhile, there's patients, guys like you and others out there, who know that they're medically vulnerable because of prior medical conditions, that they're just looking for anything. And you know what? Hey, you're just going to go with what works. You don't care if it's President Trump recommending this treatment or somebody else. You're going to talk with your doctor about what can actually work. And what you're saying is it actually worked for you. Very interesting. I'll tell you what, Joe Balyeat, stand by if you can, because I got a caller on the line who wants to mix it up with us this morning as well. Let's see, first up on the phone lines this morning. And by the way, the number for you, 406-294-0970 on our Parsec data management phone lines. Carl in Northwest Montana. Carl, thanks for your call.
Yeah, good morning, and hello to Mr. Balyeat there, and good luck on your treatments. I've been using hydroxychloroquine off and on for some 50 years now because of the malaria I contracted in Southeast Asia during Vietnam. And it definitely works. And I've also been told by medical personnel that I may have some protection because of that use of acquiring disease. So that's the plus side of it, I guess. And I haven't had any secondary problems using the drug. I don't use it continually, but whenever I have a relapse, a reoccurring problem, that's the drug treatment that I've used it through my VA doctor. So that's, I guess, my comment about it. And I agree with you that the news media certainly is hyped this up. They don't know what they're talking about, just because Trump says that they're against it automatically. And I think most American people out there, at least the people I'm around and that, which right now, because of the self-imposed quarantine that most of us are following, it's not as much as it was, but the people I talk to and that are certainly not in agreement with CNN or MSNBC or any of those. They're just so biased that you can't get any information from them. What's worse, none of them have a plan of getting through this. None
exactly.
Of them.
Yeah. Well, and the plan that they used
me is just atrocious, including our own governor here. What's he been doing for the last several weeks,
And still doesn't have a plan.
Excuse. He should have been working on a plan right along to reopen this economy, and he has not.
Yeah, I hear you there. Well, Carl, thanks so much for calling in, and thanks for your service in Vietnam. Welcome home, brother. Thanks so much for your service, and great to hear your personal insight there as well. Joe Balyeat, your take on Carl's call. I had a similar phone call from a woman in Jordan, Montana, and she said, I think it was for RA. I think for rheumatoid arthritis, I think is why she takes the hydroxychloroquine. And she's like, yeah, it worked for me for that. And I don't know why they're scaring people away from this stuff.
Yeah, well, again, I wish to God that Trump had not first mentioned it, simply because I think he would have far less resistance. But just take CNN for example, which I watch for. I started watching for hours upon hours. When you're isolated, that's what you do. CNN, of course, never reports on the dozens and dozens of studies all over the world that are taking place where doctors again and again are reporting on the positive benefits of the hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, zinc combination. And then a few days ago, about a week ago, some study came out of Brazil that they made their headline story on every segment of CNN, and they claimed that the study showed that hydroxychloroquine was unsafe and was causing heart problems. And, of course, I have heart problems myself. When you looked at the Brazilian study, they were deliberately triple dosing patients, deliberately triple dosing them. And it was only those patients that were getting triple dosed with and they weren't even using hydroxychloroquine. They were using a more dangerous, older chloroquine instead, and triple dosing them on that. And it was only those who were triple dosed that were having any heart problems. And that's the type of biased reporting that is taking place. They are simply ignoring all the positive studies, dozens of them, and I put many of them on my Facebook page, and instead they grasp at any straw they can. And if you look at every one of the things they grasp at, there are major holes in their arguments.
Well, and to be clear, and I know you've pointed this out too. Look, you're not out there acting as if a medical expert or anything like. You're just saying, hey, I had prior medical conditions. I was at risk to COVID-19. You ended up contracting COVID-19, and then you worked with your doctor. Your doctor got you on this combined treatment with hydroxychloroquine, and it reversed your down. You're just saying it worked for me, and but yet it still causes so much debate out there, from what it sounds like. We'll talk more about that here in just a second as well. But first, Henry in Bozeman, great to hear from you.
Joe, Aaron, thank you for having me on the show. Joe, old buddy of mine, thanks for having the courage for speaking out. And I'm not trying to butt into your hour here. Just I have a question for you, and that is, in your opinion, hydroxychloroquine, used with Z-Pax and or zinc being effective, why do you believe that not only the political community but the medical community has failed to promote the use of this effective treatment? We've got clinicals, we've got anecdotal evidence. What do you believe are some of the contributing factors?
Your response to Henry Kriegel, our good friend Henry Kriegel in Bozeman, his question about why isn't this hydroxychloroquine more available, and how hard is it for the average Joe like yourself to get their hands on this?
Well, Henry also asked, why do I think that the medical community is not more on board and seems to be opposed? Well, I just want to clarify a little bit there that, number one, before I ever published my article, I ran it past multiple doctors who fully agreed with it and said they hoped it got published. Number two, since the article was published, and it's already been in 5 of the major 7 newspapers in Montana, since it was published, I received many contacts from medical professionals who say that I hit every nail on the head. But nonetheless, they're a little bit reluctant to go public with it. And those who are going public, who are what I would argue are liberally leaning to begin with politically, medical professionals who just have blistered me with all kinds of name calling, say I should be in prison. I had one nurse, Missoula nurse, contact me and say that her husband was a police officer, and if she had her way, I'd be in prison, and I was going to kill all these people. And I mean, it's just sick. One other person commented that they hoped my article was my parting shot. Okay, so there has been intense backlash, but the fact of the matter is that they don't have any arguments. They don't have. Many of them don't even try any arguments. Some of them give like, oh, what about that Brazilian study? He didn't mention that. Well, of course I didn't mention it. I only had 600 words.
Yeah.
But as I told you, they're deliberately triple dosing people to create heart problems. Not only is it not a satisfactory study, they should be prosecuted for medical malpractice. So that's the first point, is that there is the most vocal are those who are have a liberal bias to begin with, and my argument is that we should not let our political biases intrude on our reporting and on our decision making as politicians, and yet they clearly are in this case. I argue that our political biases should be properly socially distanced from decisions that these politicians are making, these dictatorial decisions that are affecting life and death in people's lives. Now, Aaron, restate what your point was about the getting the medicine, et cetera, and the problems there.
Because I understand some people can't get a prescription filled sometimes. Are there challenges on that front? Yeah.
That's exactly true. And I will confess this, that even though amongst other medical professionals I've had like a 90% favorable response to my column, The biggest resistance that I've seen, hang on, I'll take a drink of water. The biggest resistance that I've seen as a percentage has been from pharmacists, which surprised me somewhat. And yet again, never with any arguments that hold water. And in my case, even my doctor sent in a prescription for one of my family members, and the big box store pharmacy would not fill the prescription. And the excuse they gave, that wasn't the only place. He had a little bit of trouble. He had to shop around trying to find some place that would fill the prescription for me as well. But in this case, their argument was incredibly lame. They said that, well, we're not going to fill this prescription because we got to save it for more severe COVID cases in the hospital. Well, it's incredibly lame. The hospital, number one, has its own pharmacy. And number two, at the time they made the statement, I don't know what it is now, but at the time they made the statement, the hospital had only one COVID patient in the entire hospital. And number three, there have been several studies, one in Brazil and one amongst doctors here in the U.S., that have revealed exactly the opposite advice, that hydroxychloroquine combination therapies are best given early on.
Interesting.
When you contact the virus.
I know a couple of weeks ago I had heard, from some of the hospitals that they felt that because of a shortage of supply of hydroxychloroquine, they had to reserve it just for the more severe patients, which I thought was just interesting in itself, given the fact that, okay, obviously they saw that it was good to use, otherwise they wouldn't be holding on to it for their patients. You know what I mean? Because if we were to believe CNN, we've been told, oh, Donald Trump's nuts to tell you to use that hydroxychloroquine works, but then we hear from the hospitals in Montana that are saying, yeah, and that's why it works, and we got to save it for our more severe patients. Yep. So that's very interesting. Joe, if we can, Henry had a follow-up too, because we had such a short time to chat before the break.
Okay.
So I just want to go back to Henry, because I know he wanted to make a quick point or question about the rally yesterday in Helena. I know, Henry Kriegel, you were at that Liberty rally in Helena. It looked like a great turnout, very peaceful demonstration. So, yeah, give us a quick update, and then maybe a question that you might want to throw back to Joe.
Yeah. I was really happy to be up there at the Capitol. It was a peaceful rally, unlike apparently what was going on in neighboring states. I'll give credit to the organizers, Ken Gardner and Conrad Everts and Cameron for setting that kind of a tone. We had at least 500 to 600 people there marching with us, and a number of cars, trucks, tractors, circumambulating the Capitol. A wonderful display of liberty up there. I was up there representing Americans for Prosperity, and our message is no more false choices. It's not work or be safe. We can work and be safe. So we were urging the governor to lighten up on the restrictions to the economy, let people go back to work. It's time for Montanans to get back to work, because the long-term consequences of being out of work not only are really bad for one's income, it's really bad for one's health.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was our message there. It was extremely well received.
And we're kicking a lot of other health concerns to the sidelines in the meantime as well. Henry Kriegel, great to hear from you. Thanks so much for calling in. Joe Balyeat, you're basically making a similar argument here, and you're somebody who has coronavirus, who is part of what we would call the vulnerable population, and yet you're saying something similar, right?
I am, but let me clarify. I loved Henry's line about it's a false choice, and you can be safe and work. And I wanted to distinguish between what some have said, that they're claiming I'm arguing that they're exaggerating the COVID disease. Okay, I am not arguing that they're exaggerating the COVID disease. I argue that some media and some left-wing politicians are exaggerating the crisis. The disease itself is scary, and it's complex, and it's real, and it's dangerous. There are ways in which it has neurological implications, which may be causing the loss of taste and smell. Some research indicates it's a blood disease similar to malaria that prevents your red blood cells from absorbing oxygen. There are reports that there's very small percentage, maybe as little as 2% immunity. Once you have it, you could get it again. There are many complex issues. In fact, for even some young people, the way this disease gets them is something called a cytokine storm, where even though it seems like they're almost completely over it, at the last minute, the virus causes an overreaction in your immune system, which starts shutting down your lungs because your immune system attacks your own body organs. And quite frankly, if this disease takes me out, that's probably the way it will do so, because that's exactly the way I ended up with an enlarged heart 8 years ago. I got a flu pneumonia in May, had a cough that hung with me for 4 or 5 months, and by September I was in the emergency room with an enlarged heart and an ejection fraction of only 15%, and it was caused, according to my doctors, by this very effect, like a cytokine storm, where my own immune system reacted by enlarging my heart.
And yet, despite all that, you're still saying, look,
right,
we still need to reopen elements of our economy. We need to get these mom and pop shops back open for business. How come?
Correct. I believe that this disease is what it is. And if the answer were to shut down the entire world economy, it just won't work. Okay? And it won't work in the sense of more people will die because of the incredible depression and poverty and just the reduction in economic productivity. More people will die from that, and more people will die because the delivery system for treating other healthcare crises will be destroyed.
Yeah.
And I just posted on my Facebook page today a UN study that says hundreds of thousands of children will die in 2020 alone.
Just from the economy.
Of the economic downturn.
Yeah, just from the economic downturn.
Yeah, not because of the virus,
but from the economy.
Because of the economic
exactly right.
Created by government, but created by government overreach.
Governor Bullock, I mean, he doesn't even have a plan yet. Joe Balyeat, that's the thing that throws me the biggest curve here is, look, we can all agree or disagree with the governor, or some people will cut him some slack. But to have ordered the shutdown weeks ago of these mom and pop businesses here in Montana while allowing the big box stores to be up and running. And now, when the President of the United States says Montana can be up and running, phase 1, and the governor doesn't even have a plan yet? I mean, you're just now starting this planning process? I mean, that to me is the most shocking here.
Yes, well, just to transition from our discussion before the commercial, even though the disease is real and dangerous and complex, especially for someone like me, the fact of the matter is for 95% plus of the population, it's very, very low risk and very, very low symptoms. Okay, and these people should be working. There's no way that we can survive if we can't get back to work. And yet here we have a governor. I don't know if you've looked at the Montana Works page where they admit that they still have not got it set up for self-unemployed people, as I call them, to get the federal $600 per week unemployment benefits. They just can't seem to get it up and working. And they tell people, we admit it's not working, fill it out anyway. You'll get a notice from us saying you are ineligible, a letter in the mail. Ignore our false letter in the mail and just sit by your computer and wait, and eventually we'll get it working. I mean, that website and that agency is headed up by Governor Bullock, and he just can't seem to get the people to do it right. And yet this same governor, who can't even get a website set up, believes that he's smart enough to make all of our life and death decisions for every person in this state under this edict. And I would argue that a far better choice would be to let people make their own decisions. And those of us like me who are at great risk, we will self-isolate. Those of us like me who have the virus, we will self-isolate. Now, I've already been told that by the county health department that I'm not even contagious anymore, and my family's not even contagious anymore, but we are still self-isolating. We will make the proper decisions for our own lives rather than rely on someone who can't even get a website up and running and yet thinks he can make these life and death decisions for every single one.
Yeah, you hit on something else that's really important there, which is, look, life is going to be different. Even if the governor opened up everything back to normal on Friday, let's be honest, it's not going to be back to normal. People are going to be doing things differently. I have dear friends that are probably in a similar situation like you, where they have a medical condition, and so they're probably going to stay hunkered down for a while in case a second wave hits later this fall or next year. They're going to be safer. I'm not going to be able to see them like I want to see them. Things are going to be different. Montanans are naturally going to do that, but we can't just allow these businesses to die, or we're not going to have a healthcare system or anything else. I mean, just like you said earlier. Joe Balyeat, it's been great to have you on the show. What else do you want to tell folks? We got less than a minute to go. Final thoughts from you.
Yes. Yeah, let me just end with this, guys. Government is not God. Government can't solve every problem with trillions of dollars of spending and millions of regulations. Government is not God, regardless of who is in charge of government. What we're seeing here is the biggest redistribution of wealth in U.S. history, in addition to all these incredible micro meddling regulations. And quite frankly, there's no partisanship in that. This is the biggest redistribution of wealth in U.S. history, and in any other times, this would even make Bernie Sanders blush. Okay, and I'm telling you, government is not God. It can't solve every societal ill with more spending and more regulation.
We were broke before this. Yeah, we were broke before this. Joe Balyeat, continued recovery to you. Godspeed and best wishes. Thanks so much, and we're glad you're doing better. Such an honor to have you on the show this morning.